Okay, and hello. If you are watching us, we are going to be starting the latest episode of the PR episodes in about 45 seconds. So do stick around. We're going to be talking about sustainability and how to market a brand and introduce new products if they've got a sustainability focus to them. So we're going to start just at the top of the hour. And it's the top of the hour here in the UK, so we're going to kick off. And did you know that the internationally recognized fast food chain McDonald's produces about 3 tons of packaging waste every minute? That's almost 2 tons of packaging waste a year. That's a lot of rubbish. So, what are fast food companies doing to mitigate their impact on the environment? Well, McDonald's latest statement about its packaging and waste management processes is hopeful. It's stating that the company aims to source 100% of their guest packaging from renewable, recycled, or certified resources by 2025, which is not that far off. Now, my name is Jim James, and I'm your host today for the latest Proudly PR episodes. And in today's show, we're going to look at how the stories related to this transition to sustainable packaging are playing out in media relations, as we have today a story about the largest McDonald's franchise in Latin America introducing sustainable packaging to Argentina, supplied by a company in Florida called J&J Green Paper, which is a company that turned to Sabina Covo, who is the co-founder and director of Sabina Covo Communications, who's based in Miami normally, but today is joining us from Colombia. Sabina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's very nice to be here to share some insight about public relations, about sustainability, two of my biggest passions, and to share a little bit about our campaign. Thanks so much to Proudly and to you, Jim.
We're delighted to have you because you've got a story about how you and your team managed to garner over 570 pieces of coverage across Latin America in a multilingual, multi-market campaign. And I know that's some challenges that you've overcome there. So we've got Sabina, who's in Cartagena, I think is how we pronounce it, in Colombia. And to answer some of the broader issues about public relations, which have a sustainability focus, we're joined a little bit closer to my home by Ben Carr, who's the Associate Director at MHP Group in the UK. And Ben leads the MHP Group's sustainable finance practice, where he works with investors, innovators, and organizations. Hope I've got that right, Ben, to help them to articulate their role in net zero. Ben, welcome.
Thanks so much, Jim. Yeah, really great to be here. I think it's an important conversation, so great to be here today, and hopefully we'll have interesting insights for the audience.
We do. We've got about 35 to 40 minutes of conversation. Sabina's going to take us through the case study of how they've got all that amazing coverage for a company that's introduced sustainable packaging through the franchisee for McDonald's. And then we're going to have a chat with Ben, and we're going to talk about some of the trends that Ben is seeing in sustainable packaging and sustainability and PR and communications. And then both of my guests are going to give me their view on the future trends that we can expect in media relations. So, Sabina, let's go all the way to Colombia first. And could you just share an overview of this amazing campaign, maybe some of the objectives and the key challenges that you had to overcome?
So it was a campaign that had to communicate in the United States first, and then we had to obviously go to countries like Argentina, where Arcos Dorados, which is the largest franchise for McDonald's in Latin America, is based, and had to be communicated not only efficiently, but it had to be multilingual. Other than that, it was at a time where PSAPs, which are forever chemicals, were a trend in the news cycle in the United States and in the world. And for people who are watching and have not been following, forever chemicals have been found in almost every other product that you have on your fridge. For instance, the ketchup, either the can or the box, or even the bottle that you get in your fridge is proven today to have some forever chemicals that can get into your blood mainstream and even into your organs and can be, according to science, very harmful. So we were going through that cycle, but at the same time, we were implementing a product called Janus, which is created by my client, J&J Green Paper, which is based in Miami, like my firm, and a product that is manufactured in part in Indonesia, China, and Miami. So imagine all of the multicultural components that we were faced when we were hired to actually communicate this campaign. It was a campaign that lasted almost 6 months of planning, until the moment where we were able to communicate that Arcos Dorados, meaning McDonald's, had already implemented a replacement for the plastic coating that they have in the wrapping papers for hamburgers. So I want to be very graphic in the way that I explain it to you guys, because all of these components were challenging and were part of what we had to communicate to the media. We had 3 different media, I would say, industries that we wanted to pitch to: the trade media, the general market media in the United States, and the general market media in Latin America. Those were our 3 targets. And the objective was to get as much coverage as possible with organic stories. So it was not only to send a press release for an entity like Arcos Dorados, that it's a public entity that is actually in Wall Street, but also to make sure that we could convince these journalists that this plastic coating solution was for real. When we started pitching, just to go back, because before we could send out the press release, we started pitching individual reporters. We started getting questions. When is this going to be launched? Who's going to use it? Is there someone in the United States that uses? One of the key tools that we had was this product has a patent for almost every other country right now in the world. We're actually going to be launching a press release soon that is going to be about the European patent that they recently got it.
So it's amazing. Just to clarify for anyone that's interested, I think it has some rice, doesn't it, as a rice base?
Yes. So
yes,
I'm going to explain a little bit about that. And this is more of the scientific part, but I learned it. I learned it my best. The Janus is made out of rice wax. So basically, it's a conversion with all the waste that rice production leaves when they're produced, and that's why China and Indonesia were the first places where this product was manufactured. It creates some coating, and it looks like little pellets. If anyone goes on the webpage J&J Green Paper, you can actually see how it looks. And from there, it actually goes and it creates different layers that can be used as sustainable coating for plastic wrappers, for cups from any type of coffee shop that you're drinking from. Today, it's been proven that it could have forever chemicals inside. So that's what Janus is.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. And if you go to the website, say J&J Papers, you can read actually the genesis story as well. But we have some time only to talk really about the campaign or the product's fascinating. I think it's definitely important to let people know how it's built. But can you explain, because I would imagine that the media really wanted to cover the big brand in this story. I ran my own public relations agency for 25 years, and the media wanted the biggest brand in the story because, of course, that would attract the most readers. So McDonald's would have been that in this story. What was your strategy to get the journalists interested in a story? And I don't mean to be rude here, but J&J Papers is a relative unknown, and Arcos, the franchisee, is an unknown outside of the trade press. So how did you get the journalists interested in the product and the company itself rather than these big brands that people knew?
So it was a 3-step process, and the first step and the second step were very challenging. I'm going to explain why. When we were waiting for Arcos Dorados, or the franchisee, to actually make the announcement, we were, eager to make our announcement, but we couldn't do it before they did it because they're a public entity. So we had to work, my team, which is based out of Miami and Colombia, we had to work with a team of communications professionals from Argentina. The way that they communicated it was through a press release that they sent in the market, meaning in Argentina, and that they published on a portal that they have where they feed all of their news. And the way and the language that they communicated in Spanish was actually very not only basic, but also with a lot of publicity. So it spoke about sustainability, spoke about how many, wrapping papers this would change, or their expectations. And of course, they thanked J&J, Green Paper, and Janus. We had to create a press release that was not only approved by the communications department for the McDonald's entity, but that also had a focus or a concentration on our client. So when we communicated this press release that they actually approved, that had our spokesperson in it, because they were not interested in having a spokesperson for this topic, and you need to respect whatever the other brand is doing. We have to work as collaborators. We noticed that if we had our spokesperson, maybe the journalists were going to reach out to us. So second step, that was the first step, the waiting time. So it was a wait time, back and forth, exchanging language, exchanging press releases, translating from Spanish to English, making sure that the wording that was used was good. And then the second step was sending it out as a press release. What happened? Most of the publications that cover Wall Street actually published it in the United States, which was great, but it was a financial story. So yeah, our client was happy, but Arcos Dorados was the main character. McDonald's was the main character in the story. So what we did is that we created individual pitches to each of the reporters that cover entrepreneurs, that cover environmental solutions, and the general mainstream media, both in the United States and in Latin America. And that's when we became more successful. We went through different publications, not only the trades and the financials, but more of the entrepreneur press, and of course, market media.
Yeah, I love that. That's really wonderful. I wanted to get into that detail of the strategy, excuse me, because so often in case studies we lose the detail, and so really wonderful, Sabina, if you'd explain that. Now, drilling down into the sustainability story, because that's really a focus for us today. There are numerous plastic alternatives on the market, and I'd love to hear how you positioned J&J paper to be different, because presumably the media may have come back to you with we've already covered paper replacements, we've already covered wax, whatever those different alternatives. How did you kind of ask to come back into the conversation with those journalists?
We use the big guys, because the fact that a company like McDonald's wants to implement a plastic coating solution and replacement in Argentina makes journalists curious. Why not in the United States? Why aren't we doing this in Europe? So one interesting fact, Latin American countries are way ahead in environmental solutions over many of the states in the United States. So for instance, New Jersey, New York, California, they have some plastic bans in place in the United States. Florida doesn't. And it's gone through the legislation many times without an impact, and no law has been created regarding plastic bans. Countries like Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, they don't even give you a bag when you go to a supermarket, a plastic bag. So they're way advanced. So we tried to explain this story to journalists in the United States, and they loved it. They see a trend and they want to cover it. And that was one of the things that, probably helped us a lot as a platform. And I want to thank that we're members and that it's worked out great for us, because we've been able to search for environmental reporters that actually are writing about this topic and that they need more information. So we have a Google alert that actually tells us who's writing about forever chemicals, the word PSAF, plastic solution, legislation, plastic ban, And then we go back to Prowly, and we can actually search with those same words, and all of the articles come out in the platform. So we go to the article and we reach out specifically to the journalist that wrote, and we say, hey, as a follow-up, why don't you want, would you want some information about Janus? Oh, but what is it? We don't understand. So, being as graphic as possible, showing videos, having spokespeople that can speak up to the product was very useful.
So that's very interesting. Within the Prowly media database, you can now search by a term rather than necessarily by just a publication title, for example, and their description. You're actually looking at, for example, the term environmental or sustainability inside their articles. That's a massive, massive bonus. That must save so much reading. Now, Sabina, the one sort of final question, perhaps. Your client was J&J Paper. How did you ensure that they were going to be getting in front of the media? Because you did mention that the media in America still wanted to talk about McDonald's. You talked a little bit about spokespeople. Do you want to just talk a little bit about who were the spokespeople then for J&J Papers, and how did you overcome that challenge?
So we selected 2 people in the team that were involved in the process, because this was a research process that took them probably over a decade to come up with this product and to make it perfect to actually be able to be implemented successfully. And we chose one spokesperson that could do English, and then one that could do Spanish. As you may know, Miami is very bilingual, so it wasn't as hard as we thought. And then we worked with the bios, with the expertise, showing their bio to the reporters and telling them, okay, this is the person that can explain you the process. So we went a lot into the science of what the solution was, not only why the solution was implemented or who implemented the solution. And I think that was the key.
And did you need to have the CEO of J&J Papers, or did you have a technical expert? Because there's some interesting studies about who the audience actually trusts when it comes to spokespeople.
We did technical people in this case.
Yes, that's very interesting.
On our general press release, we had some statements from the CEO, and then we tried to find the technical people. Of course, we have many technical people in Asia, but there was a language barrier. So, we had to choose the right people, but I think we did a good job.
You plainly did, with over 570 pieces of coverage. Sabina, you absolutely did. Now, when you were reaching out to the media, did you have any sort of skepticism from those journalists that you were just engaged in greenwashing? Or, did you find them quite receptive and open? Because obviously now there are some companies that aren't necessarily being authentic in their approach to sustainability. They're just using it as part of their marketing strategy. What was your experience in terms of the reception that you got from the journalists?
Fortunately for this case specifically, we got good feedback. The question I think came up one time, and that journalist went away. Like, we answered and they didn't cover the story. But in general, we didn't get the question, which was good. I think because it's such an innovative product. So many times you just hear, oh, we're recycling, and then all of a sudden you notice that there's no real recycling in some of the brands, and unfortunately, there's cases like that.
Well, that's right, and we've experienced it, haven't we? Where people are sort of talking about it but not really doing it. Well, let's bring in Ben, who's been patiently waiting. Although I'm sure, Ben, you're as interested as I am in the campaign that Sabina's implemented across the markets. Ben, this is a great study with J&J Papers out of Miami, but serving Latin America. At MXP in London, what challenges have your clients faced when introducing products or services which have a core message of sustainability?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. And it was great to hear from Sabina about this particular case study and some really interesting things that come out of it. I think there are a few challenges that come to mind, some of which have been covered already, such as kind of skepticism and demonstrating differentiation. But I think there's 2 that I want to drill down on and that we hear a lot from our clients. Firstly, cost perception. And the reality is that sustainable products or services are often perceived as more expensive, and there is truth in that. And Bill Gates calls it the green premium. And we need to have sustainable alternatives on a price par with what we have in the market at the moment. Otherwise, businesses and consumers will generally continue to opt for the cheaper options. So the communications advice we share is that there's no point hiding away from the fact that a certain renewable technology, for example, is more expensive than what exists at the moment. And companies should be open about what they're doing to drive down costs and really hammer down on the long-term benefits of investing in these cleaner, greener solutions for businesses and the planet. And the second challenge, I'd say, is the issue around communicating impact, and not the sense of how to quantify impact, because there's lots of tools and resources to work out how many tons of CO2 a solution can avoid being emitted. The issue lies in how do we make this relatable to the audience? And I think many of us struggle, for example, to visualize actually what is a ton of CO2. So, for example, you could include in messaging and proof points the impact equivalent in terms of taking into effect how many thousands of family cars will be taken off the road for a year, or how many times that kind of energy saving equates to in terms of charging your smartphone. And it's that type of soundbite, that type of tangibility that can really get audiences to sit up and listen and kind of make sense of the impact these solutions are having.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think this idea of a price premium, it's unfortunate, isn't it? Because the existing products have a price that's just kind of built into the cost, the environmental cost, isn't it? And we don't factor that into the true price of, for example, those cups or the transport. And what would you say are a few hallmarks of a successful campaign? Maybe you can even reference one from MHP.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes, this is a great question. I think the starting point always has to come to authenticity. And that is a word that's thrown around a lot, but I don't think it should be overlooked. And if you look around the world at the moment, governments, regulators, investors, consumers are all on the watch out for greenwashing like never before. We're seeing, kind of multi-million-dollar lawsuits, regulatory fines, consumer boycotts. So when brands get it wrong, it often does come down to a failing on the authenticity point. And I think when we try and actually understand what is authenticity, it's about showing genuine commitment to the cause. So whatever the campaign is focused on, it shouldn't be superficial or for show. It should be backed up by real actions and policies that run deep throughout a company. So example, with Sabina's case study, kind of announcing a more sustainable packaging alternative should link back to a company-wide policy, for example, on cutting down raw materials throughout a supply chain, or a campaign focused on human rights should be part of a broader effort to protect human rights across a business's operations, supply chains, customers, and suppliers. I think the second point, and I think this is often forgotten, it's about PR not being just for PR's sake, but actually what is the broader impact. It's about having that clear call to action. I think we live in an era where climate change, topics like nature, pollution, waste are all very high up on the political and social agenda. And sustainability PR campaigns should really think about what is the policy, what is the change that they want, or is it a behavior change they want to see from their audiences or consumers? I think the businesses that do this well will find an opportunity to lead and continue that conversation for months and years beyond an initial media launch, for example. And we've got a great example of an energy client that we work with at MHP, which has campaigned on the issue of air pollution and has called for UK newspapers to include air pollution forecasts alongside the weather forecast to kind of better educate and raise awareness around air quality. And we now actually see a few UK national newspapers do carry kind of air quality forecasts. If I can add in one more, and that's the point around storytelling, because there's a huge amount of change and disruption happening across industries at the moment as businesses look at the opportunities that the global transition presents. And from what we hear, media titles want to hear the solutions. They want to hear the powerful stories about the change that's happening around the world. And as you mentioned before, kind of who's best to tell these stories, if you look at some of the data, it's more often than not the people on the front lines themselves, as opposed to a CEO. So we really encourage our clients to think about making use of the scientists who are conducting, kind of cutting edge research, or engineers who are building solutions on the ground, or even kind of tapping into the communities that are positively impacted by some of the business's work.
Ben, that's great advice. And you say authenticity is what it comes down to, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
There's a temptation, isn't there, in some management teams to not engage in the sustainability conversation. My experience is that the CEOs are afraid of being caught out, if you like, if they have a sustainability conversation and then they're not necessarily as compliant as the PR team would like them to seem. What's your counsel to clients? Because plainly everybody has to have a position, a statement around sustainability. So what do you say to clients about the opportunity to engage with their stakeholders on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's too big a conversation to ignore these days. I mean, sustainability is no longer kind of a nice to have, kind of bucketed into kind of CSR programs. I mean, if you look at the kind of scale of regulation, both at a national or kind of global level, if regulation isn't at a company's doorstep now, it will be in a year, 2 year, 3 year kind of horizon. I think audiences want to see whole scale and genuine action and efforts on sustainability. And I quote the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He said last year, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. I think just that hammers home the message that every sector and business has a role to play. So if we have clients who have kind of challenging management teams, we're realistic. We know we can't change minds overnight, and very much see it as a journey that we can help to take them on. But one of the things we would do, for example, is look at what are their competitors doing at the moment on sustainability and do some benchmarking to see if there's a case that can be made that a company could very much fall behind in terms of its kind of immediate peers, or it could be criticized for not doing enough if it does fall behind. There's also kind of audience data which you can look at to demonstrate that actually you can build trust, you can make inroads, you can engage with certain groups of people by engaging in certain kind of sustainability debates. There's, of course, the upside of doing the right thing, the pure kind of business and economic benefits, which many management teams do want to hear about. That's their kind of language in which they speak. So, I mean, look, to be honest, if they have us as their PR advisor, then that probably means that there's the buy-in from the top of the business. And I think, especially here in the UK and in Europe, kind of the C-suite is also aware of the need to take a real proactive approach to sustainability issues.
That's wonderful, Ben. And I think also one of the things that I've shared with clients is that the expectation isn't that you've achieved sustainability, it's that you're on the journey to sustainability. Unless you're a J&J where your product is essentially a sustainability product, that larger companies, my clients in the past, for example, like Siemens and Philips, was about the measures that they're taking and the roadmap towards that, and taking the clients and the customers and the media on that journey, rather than saying, "Ta-da, we've arrived," which is not necessarily realistic, and for larger companies is unattainable in the moment. So I think that comes back to your authenticity point, doesn't it? That as long as we're honest with the market, what we're doing. Let's bring Sabina back in for this part of the conversation. Let's go back all the way to Colombia. Sabina, thanks for coming back. What's your view about whether businesses should take a stand in this sustainability and ESG debate? And when I say take a stand, I don't mean to sort of go into the market with a sustainability product, but actually start to raise their voices, actually participate in the conversations at a higher level.
I think that it's definitely much needed. And as consultants, I always tell them that if they are not part of the conversation, then they're going to stay out of the conversation. Because I'm going to give you another example from another industry. If I represent a real estate brand or a construction company, and I have a story from a paper like the Miami Herald or the Wall Street Journal asking me about the sustainable component to a new building, or how we're going to be engaging as a construction company in a town like Miami that is almost all year waiting for a hurricane to come, and we don't have a conversation. I'm not saying that you have to come up with a sustainable product, but at least take a stand. I think it's key for any type of industry. It's a conversation that is growing, and that we're seeing that it's a global conversation, not only a local conversation. So definitely they have to take a stand.
That's great. As you say, if they're not at the table having the conversation, it's going to carry on without them anyway, as Ben was saying, right? It's happening. Ben, some companies are built on sustainable products. We said like J&J Paper, for example, Sabina's client, and some like Arcos are implementing sustainability measures within their organization. There's quite a difference, right? What would be your view on how their strategies might differ? I know it's a little bit of a toughie I've pitched you on there, so I'm sorry about that, but there's quite a distinction, isn't there, between the two different kind of companies? I'd love to get your insight on that.
Yes, sure. I mean, the principles we've discussed already should be kind of the same regardless of who or what. But I think the different strategies comes down to kind of the contextualization. So for incumbent established businesses that are putting in motion, say, their corporate net zero strategies, as you said, Jim, it's very much about showing progress against those objectives. And I mean, incremental progress is still progress, and you may not want to shout as loud about a 1% reduction in carbon emissions versus a 10% reduction, for example, but there's a huge amount of merit in terms of transparently communicating around progress at regular points, regular intervals on the journey, either to 2030 climate goals or 2050 climate goals. And I think the other thing, which is maybe a little bit more kind of unique for those kind of larger firms, is to not communicate in silos. And for example, if you've got a supply chain initiative that you want kind of to attract attention to and raise awareness of, you've got to think about how can you couch that within your wider goals and progress as an organization. It's very easy for example, the kind of head of operations or head of supply chain to kind of look only at their small slice of the pie. But I think the role of kind of PR teams and comms teams and organizations is actually helping to tell a full kind of coherent narrative across the organization and help it to kind of piece together. And I think for those kind of brands which are pushing sustainable products or solutions, that progress might not necessarily apply to you, but I think there is a point that you can definitely demonstrate how you're helping sectors or customers make progress towards their own transition goals. So, for example, can they quantify the total impact they're having across a sector, for example? So I think the bottom line is that there's differences in terms of how you communicate the strategies and in terms of sustainability issues, depending on who you are and where you sit. But I think what they have in common is kind of this need to demonstrate action and impact.
Great reply, Ben. I think as well, what you alluded to there, or started talking about, was the internal communications. And today's not so much about that, but I'm glad you've highlighted that, because getting everybody inside the organization to move and have the same understanding of the company's messaging is actually really key, especially in this day and age with social media, where kind of everybody can communicate about the company whether they like it or not. So having everybody engaged internally is really, really important. Let's come back to you, Sabina. On the subject of sustainability and media relations, and this relationship between the topic and the channel, between the client and the audience groups, what trend or trends do you see happening in the next 3 to 5 years?
I'm seeing increased opportunity for journalists to specialize in sustainability and environmental stories. I'm a former news reporter, and I started my career 20 years ago on a Hispanic TV network in the United States, and worked on TV for 20 years and simultaneously founded my PR firm. And if we wanted to cover an environmental story, it was really hard to pitch that to your news director, because there were so many other stories that had and needed coverage at the time. And there was so much, we still have a little bit of, I would say, conflicting information, whether global warming is true or not. And, the politics come into it. But now what I'm seeing is a lot of native digital media outlets that specialize on environmental solutions. And again, going back to Prowly, you can go and see how you can find all these outlets that have become more popular. So journalists have the possibility to actually specialize on environmental journalism as much as they have the possibility to do financial or to do crime or to do legal, because the conversation has changed. And I think this trend is going to continue. And I think we're going to see more video and graphics illustrating what we're going through with our environment globally.
Very interesting. So we're going to have subject matter experts and publications dedicated to the topic rather than it being sort of an incidental story. Ben, back in London, same question for you, really. What would you say is the number one trend that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of executive profiling has always been kind of a mainstay of media relations programs, but I think we're really now seeing kind of executives and subject matter experts wanting to be seen as kind of these visible influencers and thought leaders on sustainability issues. And I think kind of with the rise of LinkedIn and podcasts, I mean, there's this real appetite to kind of elevate voices and build profiles. And maybe if I go into the podcast in a little bit more detail, I mean, when podcasts started to become a key feature of PR programs around maybe 5 to 7 years ago, we were always looking at those which were tied to an established media outlet like the BBC or the Financial Times, for example. And they're still very much kind of important and influential, but with the podcasting industry has absolutely boomed, and there's now a whole host of kind of sustainability related podcasts. It could be kind of climate change or sustainable finance that are worth engaging with. And I think if you look at the top 10 kind of business podcasts in the UK this week on Spotify, there's only one which is actually from a news outlet. The rest are kind of these independent kind of podcast production kind of studios. So I think that's just a really interesting trend, and it means that we're kind of having to evolve the types of relationships that we have, not necessarily just with kind of media titles, but now with these kind of podcast studios.
Very interesting. So a whole new category of journalists covering sustainability, and then a whole new opportunity through podcasts as a whole new channel set, really, to communicate those sustainability messages. We're going to need to wrap up, I'm afraid, because Prowly kindly bring the episodes together, but we're only able to have 35 to 40 minutes. I've kept you two over. So Sabina Covo, co-founder and director of Sabina Covo Communications in Cartagena, Colombia today, but quite often in Miami. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks to you, and thanks to everyone that joined. I'm very happy to have been part of this conversation. Ben, very nice to meet you. Jim, thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And Ben Carr, Associate Director at MHP Group here in London. Thank you as well for your contributions today.
Thanks very much, Jim. Yeah, really great to be part of the conversation. Thanks to you, Sabina and Prowly.
Absolutely. We're grateful to Prowly for bringing this together. And of course, I think both Sabina and Ben's details are in the LinkedIn post. So do connect with them both, because they've plainly got a lot of experience and would, I'm sure, love to hear from you if you've been listening. So thank you to Linda de Oliveira, who says that was amazing. Thank you for that. And I agree with you, Linda, my guests were brilliant today. So as always, you can watch this as a replay. Go to prowly.com to check for this and the earlier episodes of the PR episodes. My name is Jim James. I'm your host on the PR episodes. And thank you, Alfie, for the thumbs up. We appreciate that as well. And do stay tuned, because we will have another episode of the Prowly PR episodes coming up. Check the prowly.com website or connect to one of the Prowly team on LinkedIn to sign up for the newsletter to make sure that you also can stay connected and stay up to date with us. And in the meantime, I just encourage you to keep on communicating. Thank you so much for watching.